This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I hope most of you have arrived, and those of you have not, please go back and look at the slides if you have not, if you're missing something. Anyway, so today's topic I'm sure you've had before, but this is one of the very important clinical topics which invariably will be asked for you during your theory exam or your practicals or anywhere. So I think we must go through this topic and make sure that every one of you is thorough with. So all of you are aware that postpartum hemorrhage happens to be one of the most important obstetric emergency, which can lead to a very high risk of mortality. And hence, because we are handling women who are at a young age and where mortality is not at all acceptable, one has to be very, very careful in preventing this disease. So most of you would remember that the stages of labor, we have 4 stages of labor, and the first stage of labor involves the stage of cervical dilatation, that is from 0 to full dilatation of cervix. The second stage involves the delivery of the baby. The third stage involves the expulsion of the placenta. And the fourth stage involves hemostasis. That means once the patient has delivered and the bleeding is occurring from the placental side, something has to occur and stop the bleeding. So what are all the things that take place during the fourth stage that brings about hemostasis? So most commonly is the uterine contraction. So the uterus is so designed that it is made up of muscle fibers which are aligned like living liggages, crisscross pattern. So when they contract, you have living liggages, they constrict the vessels which are passing through it. Second, the spontaneous vasospasm. That means whenever any vessel is injured or cut or damaged, the vessel goes into a state of spasm. That is spontaneous vasospasm. Third, whenever there is any bleeding, immediately the intrinsic pathway of the coagulation system gets activated and it forms platelet plugs. So these platelet plugs will block the open vessels of the plug at the placental side and stop the bleeding. So that means an efficient coagulation system. And fourth, most importantly, is the opposition of the uterine walls. That means the two uterine walls should be very firmly opposing each other, so that there is nothing in between. If there is a hollow space, suppose the walls do not come in contact, there's just a hollow space in the uterus. What will happen? The blood will keep pouring into it. So a good uterine wall opposition is very important. So always we must have good uterine contraction, vasospasm. There should be coagulation system which is functioning and a uterine wall opposition. Now, if any of these things don't work, you will end up with postpartum hemorrhage. So that is why we must make sure that in the 1 hour following delivery, that is the time when patient is achieving hemostasis, and it is the most important stage of labor, actually speaking, 1 hour after delivery. Now, in spite of all these methods, sometimes patients can land up with profuse bleeding, and that excessive bleeding is what we call postpartum hemorrhage. Now, when will you call it as postpartum hemorrhage? So obviously some amount of bleeding will always be there because the placental site is kind of bleeding from there. So according to WHO, any amount of the blood loss of more than 500 ml at vaginal delivery or more than 1000 ml at cesarean section is defined as postpartum hemorrhage. Now, the other thing is ACOG says a fall in 10% of hematocrit is postpartum hemorrhage. So the hemorrhagic shock can be those which require blood within 24 hours of delivery. So ACOG has defined something, WHO has defined something, but think about it. Can you ever sit and measure when it has 500 ml is lost, when 1000 ml is lost? Because when you're doing a cesarean, you're not sitting and measuring this with a beaker, how much of blood loss is occurring, or at a vaginal delivery, because it's soaking all the clothes around, you're losing in the suction machine. It's impossible to assess. It's more of a theoretical definition. But what I would suggest is a very, very practical definition, where any amount of blood loss into and from the genital tract, which causes an alteration in the vitals. How? Causing a rising pulse rate and a falling blood pressure. That is postpartum hemorrhage. It could be any amount of loss, because the amount of blood loss cannot be fixed. Like for a patient who is grossly anemic, say she has a hemoglobin of 6 grams, she does not have to wait and lose 500 ml before it is called treatment. If she loses 500 ml, she'll almost be in shock and she will die. Then there are other patients who are having a very good reserve. Their hemoglobin is 14. For them, even if they lose 1.5 liters of blood, they are absolutely stable, no sign of shock. So it depends upon the patient's underlying condition, their status, their health status. So any amount of blood loss into and from the genital tract after the delivery of the baby is that which is causing an alteration in the vital signs. a rising pulse rate, a falling blood pressure. That is what we call as postpartum hemorrhage. Now, according to the world statistics, nearly 1/4 of the maternal deaths are due to PPH, which means it's very, very high. If the mothers are dying, most commonly it's due to that. And in India, the maternal mortality rate we've seen is 560 per 1 lakh live births. And PPH accounts for 35 to 56% of maternal death. Means a very high risk of maternal death due to PPH. Now, PPH can be divided into primary, secondary. What is primary? When the excessive bleeding occurs in the first 24 hours after delivery, you call it primary PPH. And if it occurs after 24 hours, but within 12 weeks of delivery, that means up to 3 months, any bleeding that can lead to excessive blood loss is called secondary PPH. Most of them are primary, immediately after delivery. Secondary is very, very rare due to some infections, but most common is primary PPH. Now, in terms of severity of PPH, you can classify them as mild, moderate, severe. Mild is when blood loss is between 500 to 1000 mm. Moderate between 1000 to 2000. Severe is anything more than 2000 mm. Now, massive PPH is when the blood loss is more than 2500 mm. And if you need to give more than 5 units of blood, that is called massive PPH. So, mild, moderate, and severe. 500 to 1000, 1000 to 2000, more than 2000. Massive would be definitely very, very dangerous. It has far-fetching effects on the patient. So anything more than 2.5 liters, that is more than half of the blood that's in the body, or requiring transfusions of more than 5 pints of blood. That's in ratio severe. Now, what happens when there's a PPH? Sudden loss of blood, very acute loss of blood leading to hypovolemic shock. It can lead to coagulopathy, obviously anemia. It requires blood transfusion. Sometimes if it is not responding to drugs, you might have to resort to hysterectomy. And because of this excessive blood loss, or if the patient survives, they can have lactation difficulties, they can have Sheehan syndrome, and sometimes, irrespective, in spite of all the efforts, they may lead to maternal death. Now, the important thing obviously is when it is so dangerous, what is it that we could do to prevent PPH? That's the most important. So, prevention of PPH is multi-pronged. One, the delivery should always be done by a skilled birth attendant at a birthing home or a health center, not at homes. So it has to be done at a place where they have skilled people to look after. Not unlike in the olden days, I'm sure most of you would recollect that your grandmothers would have told you that they delivered so many children at home. They had 5 children, 10 children. You would have heard these stories, and they all delivered at home. But very, very many times they were had complications which could not be tackled, and many people have lost lives. They've lost babies, they've lost lives. So now the dictum is only under supervision. All deliveries under supervision. Secondly, you must always have emergency drugs ready. All the drugs which are needed to combat a hypovolemic shock must always be there in your emergency tray. Thirdly, you must always document your labor and monitor it with a partogram so that you don't have prolonged labor or a precipitate labor, and you can monitor the events of the labor. And most importantly, active management of third stage of labor. That means after the delivery of the baby, in the third stage, you must do certain things to bring about a very quick hemostasis. Like you give a drug like oxytocin, which will cause a uterine contraction. You will massage the uterus, which stimulates a contraction. You do a traction, counter traction on the placenta and hasten the delivery of the placenta. So these things will cut short that third stage and also bring about hemostasis and prevent them from going into PPH. Okay. So what is active management of third stage of labor? Administration of oxytocin. 10 units of oxytocin is given intramuscular as soon as the baby is delivered. If a skilled birth attendant is available, you apply traction, counter traction, controlled traction, counter traction on the cord. If they are not available, we never encourage controlled cord traction. Also, sustained uterine massage is not done if prophylactic oxytocin is given. Uterine tone assessment should be done so that a person can put their hand on the abdomen and feel for the uterus and look for the tone. If it is nice and hard like a cricket ball consistency, you're happy. Otherwise, if you cannot feel the uterus, it's very soft, you know you're looking at tonicity and you can immediately take action. Now, those are about prevention. How do you manage once PPH is established? So the moment somebody has PPH, they're losing a lot of blood, it becomes an emergency. So there are two things. One, you have to resuscitate. Patient is going into shock. So you have to resuscitate the patient and make them survive. The second is you treat the underlying cause. What is the cause of PPH? That has to be corrected. You can't just go on giving blood. Otherwise, what will happen? You give blood from above and then pouring out from below. So unless you treat the cause, there is going to be no use. So the treatment is based on a very beautiful mnemonic called hemostasis. So coming to the general medical management, hemo. You can just remember this very easily for your exam. H, help. Ask for help. Whenever this patient is losing blood, you cannot handle this alone. You have to call for help. A, assess the vitals, the blood loss, and resuscitate. So see how the patient is, a general condition, amount of blood loss that has happened. Accordingly, you will assess the severity and take the precautions. E is establish etiology. So you have to correct the cause. If the cause is atonicity, you give the uterotonic. If there is a trauma, you switch at the traumatic side. If there is a blood loss due to coagulation deficit, you correct the coagulation factors and so on. M for massaging the uterus. You know that if you massage the uterus, it stimulates the uterus and causes a contraction, and that's what we want. O is for oxytocin. Oxytocin and prostaglandins, those which cause an increased uterine tone. So hemostasis, no, hemo is H for help, A assess vitals, blood and resuscitate, E for establishing etiology, M for massaging the uterus, and O for oxytocin. Then coming to the stasis part, that is the surgical part. So the first half was your medical. Now this is the surgical. So after hemostasis, S, shift to OT. When you think that it is not getting corrected by your oxytocin or whatever medical method, you have to resort to the next step, that is the surgical method. Here, shift to OT. T is assess what it is, whether it is due to tissue, trauma. If you exclude those causes and do a tamponade. Tamponade is apply pressure so that the bleeding will stop. A for applying compression sutures. Compression sutures are one method of securing a tone of the uterus, keeping them contracted, opposing the uterine walls. And for systematic pelvic devascularization. Now, when the bleeding is not stopping by a simple method, you have to cut off the blood supply to the uterus so that there is no blood to the uterus and the bleeding stops. So, when you want to cut off the blood supply, you have to cut off all that is supplied to the uterus, not just one. So, you know that the uterine arteries are the main source of the blood supply to the uterus. Then you also have ovarian vessels which anastomose with the uterine arteries and give blood supply. And if still these two are not sufficient, if you actually stop the bleeding by ligating these vessels and it still doesn't stop, then you will have to stop at the source. Uterine artery is a branch of the anterior division of the internal ilia. So you might have to resort to internal iliac artery ligation. So that is called stepwise pelvic devascularization. Now, one other method is I for interventional radiology, where you can do a uterine artery embolization. It will not be available in all centers, but where it is a good method of embolizing the uterine vessels and stopping the bleeding. And lastly, when all these conservative surgical procedures or methods cannot stop the bleeding, you might have to resort to a radical method, that is a hysterectomy. That hysterectomy can be subtotal or total. Subtotal means after the cervix. You leave the cervix, take out the body, because the bleeding is usually from the body of the uterus. The placenta is attached to the body. So you will remove that and do it very fast. But however, if the bleeding occurs from the lower part, lower segment of the uterus in relation to the cervix or the vagina, then you will have to do a total hysterectomy. So the second part of hemostasis is the mnemonic is for surgical method. S for shifting to OT. T, rule out the causes like tissue, retained tissue, placental tissue, or trauma sites. Apply compression sutures. Systematic devascularization. I for interventional radiology by uterine artery embolization, and a subtotal hysterectomy. Okay, coming to each of these in detail. H is ask for help. Whom are you going to ask for help? You call your senior obstetrician, senior anesthetist. The theater staff should be ready because you might have to do a surgical procedure. Hematologist, because you might have to give blood transfusions. Sorry. Okay. And you alert the ICU. So you ask for help because you're anticipating trouble. You must keep all these people in the roping and make sure that they're all available. Okay. Next was you're assessing the vitals. We said A is for assessment. You assess the vitals in terms of the pulse rate, the blood pressure, the urine output, what is happening, so that you measure all these things and you assess the severity of the blood loss. You also assess and take the samples for blood grouping. You might ideally you should have done a blood grouping, but if you have not done, you do a blood grouping and typing and cross match. Keep the blood ready. Also do a coagulation screen, a renal and liver function test, and the electrolytes. And these must be repeated every 4 hours until the patient is stable, because they rapidly deteriorate. They will be changing. So you have to constantly monitor and assess. Also, you assess the amount of blood loss. The amount of blood loss is it's very, very subjective. Each person will think differently. So quite often you may not be able to assess exactly and accurately. So there are various methods of assessing the blood loss. One is just a visual estimate, which is most often wrong. Somebody might say this looks like 200 ml of blood loss. I might say no, this looks like 500 ml. So a visual estimate is sometimes very, very inaccurate. So what is important is sometimes the blood can be collected into a bag or bedpan. So if you put certain types of, the drapes where you have a plastic V-shaped container below, whatever blood is coming, it automatically go into that, and it is actually graduated. And you can measure the amount of blood loss, as you can see in the picture. So this is called Brass-Weed blood collection drape method. Also, there are other methods which are not very practical, like determining the changes in hematocrit or hemoglobin levels. Now, you can't be sitting and doing that every 5 minutes when the patient is bleeding. Can't have a lab person coming and doing that. But more for theory, the plasma volume changes and measurement of tagged erythrocytes. But most commonly, I think practical would be for every patient, you must have this kind of a drape. When somebody bleeds, automatically the blood pours into this, this conical collecting this thing, and it is graduated, so you can measure directly how much is the blood loss. Okay. Now, once you assess how much of blood loss is occurred, you will grade them into grade 1, 2, 3, 4 based on the amount of blood loss, the pulse rate, the blood pressure, the respiratory rate, the urine output, and the CNS index. So these are the parameters you will see. So you are assessing the blood loss. You are also seeing the pulse rate and blood pressure. You are doing the vitals and the respiratory rate. You measure the urine output. So you know that as the severity increases, more and more blood loss. What happens to the kidneys? It cuts, the kidney shuts off. So what happens to the amount of urine output? It will decrease. So you must always categorize these patients and see the urine output. The lesser the urine, the more the severity of the shock. And also the CNS symptoms. You know that when there is hypoxia to the brain, it will manifest with various symptoms. So depending upon these CNS symptoms also, you can assess the severity of hypovolemic shock. So mild shock is when there's 20% loss, and you will find that there's a pale, cool, clammy skin, feeling of increasing coldness. When there's moderate shock, 20 to 40% of loss, there is oliguria, sometimes anuria, fall in blood pressure, mottling of the skin and extremities. In severe shock, more than 40% of the blood loss is gone. Then the CNS system, the restlessness, agitation, coma, ECG and EEG changes, and finally cardiac arrest. So it's very important to assess very quickly. So the rule of 30 says, if the systolic blood pressure falls by 30 mm of mercury, the heart rate increases by 30 beats per minute, the respiratory rate is more than 30 breaths per minute, the hemoglobin or hematocrit drops by 30%, or the urine output is less than 30 ml per hour, the rule of 30. It means there has been a loss of 30% of blood volume, which means it's into moderate shock. I said that 20% is mild, moderate is 20 to 40%. So it's already in the stage of moderate shock, the rule of 30. Systolic fall by 30, heart rate increases by 30, respiratory rate more than 30, your hemoglobin or hematocrit is less by 30, urine output is less than 30, all 30s. You are into moderate shock, more than 30% blood losses are. Now, so there are also other indexes to measure. So now once you have decided this patient is brought into PPH, is in a state of shock, you have to quickly resuscitate. Quick assessment, quick resuscitation. You can't assess and not do anything for the patient. So what is your aim of resuscitation? That the mental status should be maintained and the patient should be responsive to commands. The systolic blood pressure should be maintained minimum between 80 to 90 millimeters of mercury. The heart rate should be less than 120 beats per minute. And the pulse oximeter saturation should be more than 95%. And the urine output should be present. So you're going to monitor and maintain these targets. Now, the therapeutic goal of management of massive blood loss is that hemoglobin should be finally achieved of more than 8 grams per dl, a platelet count of more than 75,000, a prothrombin of less than 1.5 of mean control, an APTT of less than 1.5 of mean control, and a fibrinogen of more than 1 gram per liter. This is your final target. So when you stabilize the patient and you have achieved stability, finally, at least these are the things you should do. The hemoglobin should be at least more than 8. That means you should give blood transfusions and build up the hemoglobin, platelet count, prothrombin and activated or APTT, and enough coagulation factors. So how will you resuscitate? The first thing is, because there is severe hypoxia, loss of hemoglobin, and loss of the oxygen carrying capacity, immediately there will be hypoxia. So start giving them oxygen by an oxygen mask, at least 10 to 15 liters per minute. Then because loss of fluid is there, the patient is going into shock, you immediately want to put back some fluids. And you put in 2 large bore cannulas, 14 or 16 gauge cannulas. They are the orange and gray colored cannulas. Patient should be kept warm and you start giving them fluids. Now, what are the fluids that you give? The first thing is, ideally, you should replace blood loss with blood. Now, it's very difficult to get blood suddenly like that. So start with crystalloids, which are easily available. Up to 2 liters of ringer lactate solution can be given. You can also give up to 1 to 2 liters of colloid until blood arrives. In the meanwhile, you ask for blood, and although cross-matching normally takes about 45 minutes, then in such an emergency, you can directly give them uncross-matched blood, that is O negative. Because O is a universal recipient, O negative is best. You give O negative uncross-matched blood until you get a proper cross-match. Then for every 6 units of blood that you give, you must give 4 units of fresh frozen plasma. FFPs, 4 units of FFPs for every 6 units of red cells or whatever. And the platelet count, when will you give platelets? Only if the platelet count is less than 50,000 per millimeter. And if you have fibrinogen levels falling below 100 milligrams per DL, then you give them also cryoprecipitate. So what are all the things you give? Crystalloids, colloids, blood, FFPs for 4 for every 6 pints of blood, platelets only, so platelets are less than 50,000, and cryoprecipitate if the fibrinogen is less than 100 milligrams per DL. So every possible kind of, this blood fractions are given, and you should know that these are all available in the blood bank. Always keep in close contact with the blood bank staff and ask them if it is available, and always keep them ready. Especially OBG people must be always in good terms with the blood bank people. Okay. Now, in case of severe PPH, you must have a central venous line, and you should also have a arterial blood gas analysis. So, what is severe PPH? More than 2 liters of blood loss. Massive PPH is more than 2.5 liters, or it is 5 units of blood has been transfused. The important thing is an empty, intact, contracted uterus will not bleed unless there is coagulation. So what is important? The uterus should be empty, it should be intact, that means there should be no trauma, and it should be well contracted. That makes sure that there is very good contraction and there will be no bleeding. If there is coagulopathy, of course, nothing will stop. So establish the etiology. What is the cause of the bleeding? Now you look for the tone. If the uterine tone is good, it rules out atomicity. Trauma, look for any trauma in the genital tract. Is there any tears in the vagina? Is an episiotomy being extended? Any tears in the vault? Any tears in the cervix or anywhere? That can lead to excessive blood loss. Paraurethral tears sometimes go undiagnosed. Then look for tissue, any retained placenta. As I told you, the walls of the uterus should oppose each other and there should be no place. Now, if there is a retained bit of placenta, the whole placenta did not come out in toto, or there is some bit left inside, what will happen? It will not allow the walls of the uterus to oppose each other. And that's when the uterus cannot contract and there will be hollow space, there will be collection of blood. So that could be one. And lastly, thrombin. That means any abnormality in the coagulation pathway. Due to some coagulation abnormality, it can lead to bleeding. So alteration in the tone, presence of trauma, presence of retained tissue, or an abnormal coagulopathy can lead to bleeding. And you have to identify the cause so that you will treat accordingly. Now, what are the causes of thrombin defects? Like in eclampsias, placental abruptions, pyrexia, bleeding disorders like hemophilia, anticoagulation, von Willebrand disease, there could be thrombin defects. When will you have tissue problems? That is retained bits, retained placenta, placenta excreta, or any products of conception that have been left behind, small bits. When can there be loss of tone? In cases of placenta previa, low-lying placenta, where the uterus will not contract. There can be an over-distended uterus, like in multiple pregnancy, polyhydramnios, macrosomal, over-distended uterus which fails to contract. Or if the patient has been taking uterine relaxants, tocolytics for some other reason, like the preterm labor, and then suddenly she goes into labor. You've been going on giving them tocolytic, so the uterus remains relaxed, and now also it will remain. And history of previous PPH makes them at high risk of bleeding. Now coming to trauma, there could be an extension of the wound during cesarean sections. There could be an extension of episiotomies or an unidentified bleeder in the episiotomy wound. Or there could be macrosomia leading to excessive tears all over. So these are all the different causes of bleeding. Now, what will you do? Once you start, you see that there is bleeding, there is atomy, you immediately massage the uterus. You put one hand inside the vagina, gloved hand, like you make a fist and you put it inside the vagina. The other hand is on the abdomen. Between the two hands, you are going to compress the uterus. It's called bimanual compression of the uterus, because of which there will be one stimulation of the uterus, which causes contraction, and that's what you want. Secondly, when you compress the uterus, there is no place for the bleeding to collect. The walls are opposed to each other. There is no place for the bleeding to collect. Then you give them oxytocins. Oxytocins are oxytocin, methergin, and prostaglandins. These are the 3 main types of drugs which you have in your armamentarium. So first line agent is oxytocin. How much do you give? You can give an infusion of 40 units of oxytocin in 1 pint of your fluids at the rate of 12 ml per hour. So the good thing is it acts within 2.5 minutes of giving IM, and it is more stable. The disadvantage, however, is it has a short half-life. So it will quickly get used up also. And excessive amounts can lead to water intoxication, nausea, and hypotension. So oxytocin is the first line drug. Carbetocin is a synthetic analog of oxytocin. It is similar, but it has a longer duration. It is more expensive. We usually use oxytocin. Now, the second drug, which is very easily available, is Methergine. Methergine can be given IV or IM. IV, it acts in 1 minute, very fast. IM, it takes little more time, 6 to 7 minutes. But the good thing is it has a half-life of 120 minutes. That means it will persist. It lasts for 2 to 4 hours. And it causes a very rapid, strong contraction, tetanic contraction, very strong, persistent contraction, which is very good. And it's very cheap and easily available. Now, the only side effects are hypertension, vomiting. So, we should not give them in patients who are hypertensive or having cardiac disease. The reason is that it causes very strong contraction. The vessels go into spasm, and that can lead to more high blood pressure. And also, in a patient with heart disease, it can lead to increased venous return to the heart, and that can overburden the already weak heart. So, but one thing about Methergine is it is not stable when exposed to heat, light, or freezing. So, you must store it properly. That's important. Okay. Next is Prostadine, 15-methyl PGF2 alpha. This is otherwise called Prostadine or Corboprost. It is given in the dose of 0.25 milligrams IM. It must be given IM, intramuscular or intramyometrial. That means it can be given into the uterine wall. Okay, inside the uterine wall. And it can be given maximum up to 8 doses. So this 0.25 milligrams can be going on repeated for almost 8 doses. Every 15 minutes, you can repeat up to 8 doses. The only one thing you have to remember is the contraindication is asthma, very specifically asthma. You should not give an asthmatics because it causes very severe bronchospasm, and that can be very dangerous. So be careful when you're giving Corboprost. You can keep repeating, but it's an excellent drug, very good. The side effects are vomiting, hyperpyrexia, diarrhea, and bronchoconstriction. This is the most important, bronchoconstriction. That's why we don't want to give an asthmatics. Now coming to the summary of these main 3 drugs: oxytocin, Methergine, and Prostadine. So oxytocin, I said, we can give as an infusion. You can be infused 20 units in 1 liter, or when there is excessive bleeding, you can put up to 40 units in a liter, and you give them IV. The limit is you should not give more than 3 liters of IV fluids containing oxytocin, not more than 3 liters. That means not doing more than 6 pints. And you should never give them as an IV bolus. You don't give oxytocin as a bolus. You give them in the infusion. Whereas Methergine, you can give IM or IV, and you can give as a bolus. And you can keep repeating the doses. That is, this 0.2 milligram, which is the dose of Methergine, can be repeated every 15 minutes if the uterus is not contracting, up to a maximum of 5 doses. 5 doses. Okay? So, a total of 1 milligram. However, as I said, you should not give them in patients with hypertension and cardiac disease. Prostadine, 0.25 mg. It is given IM or intramyometrial. And you can repeat them every 15 minutes, maximum of 8 doses. Methergine 5 doses, Prostadine 8 doses. It is a maximum of 2 milligrams. And main contraindication, as I told you, asthmatics, because it leads to severe bronchoconstriction. We also have another drug called Misoprostol in various trade names. Here, these are available in 200 microgram tablets. And you can give them 600 micrograms, you can give them oral or sublingual, or 1000 micrograms rectal. But that means 5 tablets per rectal can be given. However, the efficacy is not as much, especially in PPD, it takes time. So what are the drugs recommended by WHO? First, oxytocin. Second, Methergine. Third, Corboprost. Those are the 3 very, very important drugs. Now, what are the other methods that are also available, other drugs for controlling of bleeding? Tranexamic acid and certain local topical hemostatic agents like thrombin, topical thrombin, oxidized cellulose, or gelatin sponges, and so on. What is the role of tranexamic acid? It can be used in PPH where it decreases the blood loss and metal morbidity. It is given in a dose of 1 gram IV bolus followed by another 1 gram after 4 hours. So 1 gram IV. And after 4 hours, you can repeat another 1 gram. So these are some intraperitoneal hemostatic agents. That is, when during a cesarean section, if there is a bleeding, you could give some local hemostats, like you can have an ultra foam or a fibrin glue or a gel foam or a Surgicel. Now these are all different types of collagen or triacetates which can absorb this blood and bring about hemostasis. So these are in the form of a powder or a spray or strips of different sizes, and they are put on the local area which is oozing. That will stop the bleeding. So these are local hemostatic agents. Now, coming to once we finish this medical drugs, what are the surgical methods? So we said hemostasis. So coming to stasis, first is shifting the patient to O2. So if the bleeding is not getting controlled by medical methods, you have to do some surgical procedure. For that, you have to shift the patient to O2. Now remember that if you have to shift the patient is in the labor room, or you might be in a periphery, you don't have an OT setup there. Then what do? If you just shift the patient is pouring out blood all along the way, you will find that the patient will be continuously bleeding, and everybody will know that one patient is going there from here with people. You can't do that, isn't it? So you want to stop the bleeding until you reach the OT at least. So you can apply firm pressure on the aorta. With your fist, you can see they're applying firm pressure on the aorta for abdomen, so that at least the blood to the uterus is cut off and the bleeding will decrease. Now there's something called non-inflatable anti-shock garment. So that garment is worn from below upwards and it compresses the peripheral blood vessels. And what does it do? It cuts off the blood supply to that and maintains blood to the essential organs. So these are the anti-shock garment. Next, you want to do a tamponade. Until you reach the surgical theater, what you could do, you can do a gauze packing. You can pack sterile long gauze into the uterus, not bits and pieces. It has to be very big, long gauze. If you don't have one long one, you can attach one to the other by knots, but it must be sterile and should be firmly packed into the uterus until the fundus, and very firm packing. Now, what else to do? When the uterus is packed, one, there is no place for the blood to collect. There is no place for it to bleed into. The second thing is when the gauze is put inside, it is like a foreign body. And the foreign body stimulates the uterus to contract and push it out. Now, that's what we want. We want the uterus to contract. So, a packing will help in the hemostasis. Second, you can have a condom tamponade, okay, or a Sengstaken Blackmore catheter, or a Bakri balloon. So these are different methods which are used to fill the uterus, distend the uterus with something, so that firm pressure is applied on the uterine wall, and there will be no bleeding. Right? So you can have all these things. So you monitor the pulse rate, the blood pressure, temperature, urine output, and look for the fundal height. If there is bleeding through the uterine catheter every 30 minutes, you know that the continuation of the bleeding is there, you keep it there. And while you put this foreign body inside, you must give them antibiotics, broad spectrum antibiotics, because you're introducing the foreign body inside. So you can see here, this is a condom tamponade. The condom is filled with fluid. You can see that IV set, and you distend that and put it inside the uterine cavity. And that distension will compress the uterine wall. This is a Foley's bulb which can be put inside the uterus and distended. Same. And also this, you can see the Sengstaken Blackmore tube. You would have heard about it in the management of esophageal varices. Okay. Now, after 6 to 8 hours of tamponade, if you find that the fundus is at the same level and there is no active bleeding, you can slowly deflate. You deflate the balloon, whatever method you used, either it is a Foley's or a Sengstaken tube or a condom catheter, whatever. You can deflate it, but don't remove it for 30 minutes. You continue the oxytocin infusion, even if there is no bleeding. And if still after 30 minutes there is no bleeding, you can slowly stop the oxytocin, and you can also remove the balloon catheter. However, if the bleeding restarts, once you deflate it, you immediately inflate the balloon. So that is why we don't remove the balloon immediately. We wait and see whether the bleeding has stopped. Now, these are conservative methods of stopping the bleeding. Now, if this tamponade does not help, then you have to open the abdomen, apply compression sutures. That means these sutures will compress the uterus. Now, you cannot go on compressing the uterus with your hand continuously. So these compression sutures, what is called the B-Lynch technique, where you put in a suture from the front to the back and throw it from the back to the front and tightly close it, so that it compresses the uterine walls and keeps it in a position. This is one way of compression sutures, so that there is no cavity for the blood to collect, and it keeps the uterus tight and contracted. So it is very easily applied, and also you are conserving the uterus. You are not removing the uterus, so fertility is preserved. But sometimes it can erode through the wall of the uterus, and sometimes it can lead to pyometra uterine necrosis. So there are various methods of these suturing techniques. One is the very popular B-Lynch technique. Then they have what is called Chose sutures, where you have small 4 squares. Sutures are made from front to back to front, and that compresses the uterine wall. So these are called Chose sutures. So each person came out with a different method, but the final purpose is that the walls of the uterus oppose each other very tightly, and there is no space in between. That is the whole purpose. Now, the next method is stepwise pelvic devascularization. That means you compress the uterus, you try to close the uterine cavity, but the bleeding did not stop. So what do you want to do? You want to cut off the blood supply to the uterus. Now, what is the blood supply? Mainly uterine artery. But it also anastomosis with the ovarian artery. So you also have to cut off the uterine artery. And if still the bleeding does not stop, you have to cut off the source of blood supply to the uterine. That is the anterior division of the internal uterus. So all these methods, you have to resort to ligatures on the vessels feeding the uterus. So this is stepwise devascularization. Now, in spite of another method of stopping the bleeding is by a radiological intervention. If you have the facilities, this will be excellent because you can have open and you can apply through a percutaneous femoral catheterization. So you will catheterize the femoral vessel and pass gel foam particles. This is called uterine artery embolization. These gel foam particles will block the uterine arteries and stop the bleeding. So this is ideally a very good method because you don't have to resort to an open surgery. However, you need to have the technique and the infrastructure to do this method. Now, so this is the embolization. The success rate is very good, but however, you have to have the personnel and the infrastructure. So the bleeding from the uterine artery can be stopped by putting these gel foam pellets. So it cuts off the blood supply. So there will be no more bleeding once the embolization has occurred. You can see there is no more bleeding. Okay. Now one more new drug, the recombinant factor 7A. This is a new drug which is available, or the advanced drug which is life-saving. As an alternative to hysterectomy, it initiates a coagulation cascade. So it promotes the coagulation cascade, and it is reserved for intractable hemorrhage where the bleeding cannot be stopped, and in cases of abnormal coagulation causing bleeding. So in such cases, it's not easily available, but recombinant factor 7A, if it is available, it would be very useful or life-saving in this specific indication. So you give them in the dose of 80 micrograms per kg. That is, in an adult, normally 4.8 milligrams dose. So, but the thing is, each 1.2 milligrams is costing 40,000. That means a full dose will cost more than 1.6 lakhs. So that is very, very expensive and it's not easily available. But you can definitely write in theory that this is something which is there. You can definitely use it as a life-saving procedure. But before giving this, one must make sure the platelet should be more than 20,000 per millimeter cube, and the fibrinogen level should be more than 100 milligram per dl. Only then you can. So two requirements: the platelet should be more than 20,000, and fibrinogen should be more than 100 milligram per dl. Okay. In spite of all these things, we have given all these things, but still the bleeding did not stop. We ligated the vessels, we applied compression sutures, we gave them this. However, it does not stop bleeding. Then as a last resort, we might have to do a subtotal hysterectomy. Now remember that don't delay it so much that after the patient has lost so much blood that they have gone into irreversible shock, there is no fun in doing a hysterectomy. So when you find patient is not responding to a step 1, 2, 3, 4, quickly resort to a subtotal hysterectomy. Now why subtotal? Because speed is important. The bleeding is usually from the fundus, from the body of the uterus. So remove the body of the uterus and quickly close it. That will be subtotal. However, if sometimes the bleeding is occurring from the lower part of the uterus, that is from the cervix or the lower segment, the vagina, then there is no fun in removing only the uterus and keep other body and keeping the cervix. There you should remove the cervix also. That's when we will do a total hysterectomy. So whether subtotal or total depends upon where the bleeding is coming. Okay. So when the source of bleeding is in the lower uterine segment, cervix or vagina, do a total hysterectomy. That is the last resort. This for a young patient in the childbearing age, she might want to conceive again. We don't want to do a drastic step like subtotal or total hysterectomy because that will be the end of her fertility. But as a life-saving procedure, as I told you, that PPH can lead to a lot of bleeding and a lot of mortality. So in such cases, sometimes we may have to resort as a life-saving procedure. So this is one thing you must remember, what is called the pelvic umbrella or a parachute packing. Here, when after hysterectomy, when somebody has done a hysterectomy and there is continuous bleeding still persisting, to arrest the intractable bleeding following hysterectomy, as a life-saving procedures, when all other methods are failed, you can pack the pelvis. You remove the uterus, still there is bleeding, so you pack the pelvis, and as a last ditch attempt. And you can also do it in areas where you don't have very high resource availability for various methods. You can pack the pelvis and put the lower end into the vagina. So that just by the pressure of this pack, the bleeding might stop. And once this hemostasis is occurred, you can later on remove this pelvic pack. It's called the pelvic umbrella or parachute effect. Now, coming to secondary PPH. As I said, secondary PPH is bleeding which occurs after 24 hours and within 12 weeks of delivery. Why should somebody bleed so late? Some of the main causes are retained placental tissue. So if there's a little bit of tissue left, it might get infected. It can lead to endometritis. is endomyometritis, and that could lead to secondary. Most often, it is infection is the cause of secondary. Rare causes are persistent gestation trophoblastic neoplasia. So in some class previously you've heard about gestation trophoblastic neoplasia, where you could have a neoplasia following a normal pregnancy. Also, normally it follows a hydatiform move, but even after a normal pregnancy, somebody can have a neoplasia, and that can bleed. There could be a chronic uterine inversion, or a pseudoaneurysm in the uterus, or an arteriovenous fistula at a cesarean start. So all these things can lead to a late or secondary postpartum hemorrhage, which can be sometimes very dangerous, and mostly you're not expecting it. Patient has been discharged, gone home, suddenly she comes back with profusely. That can be very dangerous. So one has to remember that the various causes of PPH, whenever it's a primary PPH, remember the 4 common causes are abnormality in the tone, the tissue, that is uterine bits of placenta, third, the thrombin, any coagulation defects, and what is the last one? Tissue, thrombin, tone, and coagulation. Any coagulation defects can lead to unnecessary loss of blood. And the secondary PPH is mostly due to infections. So always be wary of these causes and treat at the earliest at great speed. And for that, you need a team effort. You have to be in readiness and preparedness with all the drugs, and you have to have a system where you can call for help in emergency. You should know all the medical methods and all the surgical methods. So as a medical method, you can have all the oxytocin ready, that is oxytocin, methadone, and prostatic. If it fails, in spite of all the oxytocics, you will do some conservative procedures like uterine massage, bimanual compression, you can do a tamponade, you can do some compression sutures, and you can do a stepwise devascularization. And only as a last resort, when nothing works out, even if you have facilities, you can do an embolization. But if nothing works out, you can do a subtotal hysterectomy. Not too late. You must do it early enough before the features of shock set in. So share the gift of life and save lives today. Thank you. Okay, girls and boys, all of you read this chapter and make sure that you all have all these answers ready, because we'll be giving you questions. You must write these answers because they will definitely be coming in some form or the other, either in the theory or in your clinics, practicals. This is one of the most important topics. And you can have short notes in the form of oxytocics or just a surgical procedure, or like say stepwise devascularization, uterine artery ligation, or internal iliac artery ligation. So there can be so many questions from this chapter on PPH. So take care, stay safe, and keep reading.